The neutral. In fact, the ultra looks at it. Sagt der Heilige Mishnah, Kayoytze boy, Retzeach shegola le'ir miklatoi. A Retzeach who went to the Ir Miklat, and the people of the city wanted to be Mechaber, give him a position. Yoimer lahem, he should tell them, Retzeachani, I'm not ready for a covet, I'm a Retzeach. Amr loy. So they told him, if they told him, Afal Pi Kain, even though we know you're a Retzeach, we still want you to accept this covet. He should accept the covet. Shenemar says in the pasuk, V'deh devar haritzeach. Turning on to Yud Gimel Amar Aleph, Mailim hoyu schar lilavim. They would have to pay rent. Now, I touched it as rent, but Rashi says something a little different. Rashi says, Mailim hoyu ha'orim schar lilavim. The cities would pay schar to the Levim, sheroitzchim soichrin mehem, that the roitzchim rent from the orim is b'atei adir. So the Samsara speaks out that if they just have to pay rent to individual homeowners, and individual homeowners were renting their homes to these roitzchim, well, then they could technically take advantage because these roitzchim are desperate for a dira, and they could ask any price you want. So what they would do is all the cities around Ari Miklat who will potentially benefit from the Ari Miklat, who are being serviced by those Ari Miklat, they all had to chip in and have a fund with which they built apartments for the express purpose of hosting Roishim to come to the Ari Miklat. So that's what Rashi means, is the Orim, meaning all of the cities around the Ari Miklat that were serviced by the Ari Miklat, had a fund that would pay for the construction of exclusive units that were meant to house the Roitzchim. That's what they paid him. Tosfos learns it's more than that. For sure they paid rent, but they even paid municipal taxes. Mailim hoyuschai levim pirush Roitzchim aboyim v'dorim shom shrichen halos mas v'arnoina levim. They had to pay the municipal taxes to the Levim. The loitema gzeres hamelech al levim. There's no Gzeres HaMelech, Gzeres HaKosov, that the Levim have to host these people for free. So most of them learn. So according to Tosfos, that you have to pay tax. Also, they're paying rent. They had free rent. Now, if the person was a Rav who was in Golos or some other position that he was in, when he goes back home after the Kohen Gadol dies, he goes back and he gets reestablished as whatever position of covet he was in. As Rashi says, that's it for a mayor. No, he didn't. He doesn't go back to his covet. He becomes a private citizen. Amar of Kana, machloikis b'sheish. The whole machloikis as to whether or not the Oisech has to pay rent, the machloikis between the Yehuda and Reb Meir, that's only in those 6 designated cities. The Marsover lochem, the Torah says that these lands should be lochem, v'hayu lochem ha'orim l'mikla. So it's l'klita. All you have is klita. They protect you from getting killed. But that doesn't mean you have free rent there. Umar sover lachem lachol tzarchechem. No, when you say v'hayu harim lachem, that means they're for yours for all your purposes. Meaning you don't even have to pay rent. But that pasuk is talking about the 6 cities. But the other 42 cities that belong to Leviim, divrei hakoil hayu mahalam lo mischar. For sure, in those 42 cities, they had to pay rent. Amalei Rava zok Rava no. Hi vaday lachem l'chol tzarchechem mashma. The lachem referencing the 6 cities is zicher l'chol tzarchechem. Zicher, everybody agrees that in those 6 cities the Reitzim did not have to pay rent. The whole question of whether or not you have to pay rent only refers to the 42 cities. The Marsavar v'aleim titnu, where the pasuk says you on the 6 give another 42 cities. kihanach leklita. They'll be just like the other Ari Miklat, meaning they're koilet. Umar sover b'leim titnu kihanach mahanach l'chol tzorchechem afhaninem l'chol tzorchechem. So the Valeim Titnu on the 42 cities, do they just have the Koich HaKlita like the original 6, or are they exactly like the original 6 where they would not have to pay rent? Abu B'Sheish, but the original 6, Zokt Rava, Divrei HaKoil Lo Yehoyu Mailam Lamscha. The original 6, Yuzicher, the Ratzchim Zicher did not have to pay. They had free rent. Chayzer L'Sror Shayava, Tanu Rabbanim, V'Shavel Mishpachtoi, V'Elachuzas Avoisav. V'Elachuzas Avois Yoshev. There's a double lashon. Now this pasuk is not talking about a Ritzeach by our Miklat. It's speaking about an Eved Ivri that goes free from his avos. So there's like a double lashon here. V'Shavel Mishpachtoi, V'Elachuzas Avoisav Yoshev. So how do we darshan it? L'Mishpachtoi Hushav, V'Eino Shav L'Mashech Siku Avoisav Divrei Rabbi Yehuda. He only goes back home to his family. But if he had some type of position of sorora, that he doesn't get back. That is Rabbi Yehuda teaching the Pasha to teach the Pasha. But Rabbi Meir, there's a double lashon. Says v'elach huzas avois of Yoshev. What's that double lashon? Rabbi Meir af hushav l'mashech siku avoisav. Because elach huzas avoisav kavoisav. He goes back to the original. V'chein begoila, and the same halacha applies to someone who is in Golus. That's Reb Meir talking. Kishu Omer Yoshuv, it says V'shavel Mishpachtoi V'elachuzas Avoisav. The extra word Yoshuv is completely extra. What does that extra Yoshuv teach you, Dr. Meir? The Rabbi says a Ritzeach to teach you that the same halacha that we learned in reference to an Eved Ivri also applies in a different case by a Ritzeach who's leaving the Arim Mikla. My v'chein begoila. What does the Mishnah mean, or the Brisa mean, when it says in your Meir Shita v'chein begoila? It's Kidditanya. Yoshev ha'Ritzeach el Eretz Achuzasoi. So we learn la Eretz Achuzasoi Yushav ve'ein Yushav l'ma shechsiku avoisav. That's Divrei Rabbi Yehuda. Reb Meir af Hushav l'ma shechsiku avoisav. How do you know that? By Golus. You know it because Gomer Shiva Mechasa. It says the extra word Yoshuv, where the pasuk talks about the Eved Ivri, and it says Yoshuv in our pasuk, where the person in Golus is going free, as Rashi says, the Mufna Lod in the Menik Zereshava, the Merkan Yoshuv, the Nemar B'Ritzeach Yoshuv B'Ritzeach Al Eretz Achuzasai. And just like by the Eved Ivri, it means back to his former position, so too by the Ritzeach, he goes back to his former position. Baruch Hashem, we were zeicher to finish the second parak of Elohein HaGoyim. So v'linei der hadim noch Elohein HaGoyim, v'linei der hadim noch Elohein HaGoyim, v'linei der hadim noch Elohein HaGoyim. Now v'Elohein HaLoikim. Now we're going to discuss those people that get Malkus. So Rashi tells us right off the bat that this is not a comprehensive list. Dok Rashi, Elu lav davka. The Tana v'Shayar loikin tuva. There's many things that you get Malkus for that aren't listed in the Mishnah. So why is it that the Mishnah lists off those that it chooses to list? So Rashi will go through them, but first let's see the Mishnah inside so we know what the Mishnah is actually listing, and then we can look back into Rashi as to why the Tana decided to select these Chayvim Malkus. Habal achoisoi, bal achois aviv, bal achois imoi, bal achois ishtoi, v'al eishes achiv, v'al eishes achi aviv. Now all of these arayas are unique, and now we'll see Rashi why. Elatana chayve krisus, all of these arayas that we just listed are not chayve misas bezdin, rather the chayve krisus. Lashminon the yesh malchus b'chayve krisus, to tell us that although there is no malchus for chayve misas bezdin, but someone who's chayve chorus will get malchus. Then it lists out Be'alnida, which is also chayve chorus. Almana l'koyin gadol and gerusha v'chalusa l'koyin hedget. Why is that listed off as an example of a lab? Zok Rashi, v'tan almana grusha lashminan almana grusha chayiv alei mishum shtei shemos. If you have a kohen gadol who marries a woman who's both an almana and a grusha, he'll get 2 malkias. Okay? Then you have mamzeres unesinu liyisrael and bas Yisrael unesinu lamamzer. Okay? Almana ugrusha chayovin aleh mishum shtei shemos. So this is what Rashi told us is why the Mishnah listed off all of these psulim. It's only because the Mishnah wanted to tell us this chiddush that almana grusha you're like a love mishum shtei shemos. Okay, grusha v'chalutza there einoi chayiv ela mishum achas bovad. You only get 1 malchus. That is a little bit of discussion between Rashi and Tosfos. Tosfos says chalutza is only midrabanan. Rashi says it's derived from the same lav as gerusha, so therefore you wouldn't get 2 malchus. Okay, what's the next thing? Hatamei sha'achal es hakodesh. Someone who was tamei, who ate kachim, v'aba el hamikdash tamei, or someone who came into the base of mikdash when he was tamei, v'yochel chela v'dam. If someone eats chela or dam, v'noiser or noiser, upigel or pigel, v'tamei. If someone eats tamei, v'ashoichet umayla b'chut. If someone does shchut echutz, or he does halah b'chutz, via oichel. One second. V'tana tuna. Back in Rashi. V'tana tevel l'ma'aser rishon. Oh, that's Viter. I'm sorry. Via oichel chametz v'pesach. Someone who eats chametz v'pesach. Via oichel via oisa melacha b'yom kippurim. If someone eats on Yom Kippurim, or if he does malacha on Yom Kippurim, ha'mefatim is a shemen. If someone makes the shemen HaMishcha with exactly the same recipe as the Torah discusses, the Torah is not allowed to do that. Or if you make the duplicate of Torahs, or if you smear yourself with shemen HaMishcha, or ochal tevel u'ma'aserishon she'neinat l'trumasai. So now let's go back to Rashi. We tell the tevel u'ma'aserishon she'neinat l'trumasai. The loy mefarish laved to behedya. Those tevel and ma'aserishon she'neinat l'trumasai. There's not a mefarish lav for that. So that's what Tana wants to mention it. V'chein hekta she'neinifta as well. It's not a mefarish lav. We're going to soon see where it's learned out of. V'aydi the Tana hektish Tana ma'aser sheni. Once it says hektish, says mashasheni, behedya, the tavayu, malchus, the 2, mishum mechusha pidiyah. Because both of them you get malchus because they're not redeemed. B'chein beruban yesh davar chodesh. Right of the items in our Mishnah have some chiddush to them. Nisina. What is a nisina that we learned earlier in the Mishnah? If someone marries a nisina, it's chayiv malchus. That's mina gavanim. She came to the gavanim malchus mishum loy teschatin ba. The pasuk says loy teschatin ba. Almana ugerusha. Meaning she is almana be'ish echad v'niskasha me'ish acher. So she has 2 conditions. Chayav lo shtei malchis, mishum shtei shemos, mishum shtei asaros, sheshtei mefarashes b'mikra. It says almana separately, and it says grusha separately. B'asara tavayu kaimer. The lav is going on both of them. Grusha v'chalutza. Zok Rashi, grusha v'hi chalutza. We're talking about a woman who's both. Einei chayav Allah el mishum grusha. Why? Shachalutza in ksuva, there's no meforsha la for chalutza. Lemeribuya ma'asinula. You know from a riboy. The tiny bekadushin grusha ainly al grusha chalutza b'nayin havalomer v'isha. And Tosfos is magia. And Tosfos says it's not that you learned it out of the same place. Tosfos says rather it's because it's rabbanon. Makos is rabbanon. Okay, so he learns as rabbanon. Divaiter. Tamei shachal is a kodesh. Where is the law for that? As a Rasim and Farish Gemara, the Gemara is going to tell us. Noisek sivvei the seraftis hanoisek beish lo yoichal he kodeshu. Azoras pigel nami mehachal. We learn pigel from the same law as noiser. He kodeshu climber mepneishu kodesh and nifsal. Pigel is also kodesh and nifsal as is noisar. Lamad mikan kol shebekodesh possible anything any kachim that's possible. Bakos of litin loisas alachilosoi. The Elisha said, eat it. Come on. Vazoris Tomei. Where did it say they're not Tomei? Is a Basar Shiga L'chol Tomei Lo Yochel. Okay, Vasheichet Kachim Mechutz. Oyamayla Kachim Mechutz. Asaris Milo. Where do you know it's also to be Milo Mechutz? Hisham L'chab Hendala. Vasar Shoichet Yafidim Mizrachim Bever. Shoichet Amayla. Ika Diyalef Milo Yizbechoid. Ika Diyalef Lo Migzer Shava. Avo Avo Shoichet Mima. Ha'ich B'Yom Kippurim. Yelef Hazarasa B'Perek Basa the Yuma. At the end of Yuma, it tells us the Yisr Allah of Tila Yom Kippur. Mefatim Misah Shemen means Oysa Shemen. B'Dugmas Shemen HaMishra. V'Zartai, and its love is Uvemaskuntai L'Sasu Kamayu. V'Chem Victorious, it says Uvemaskuntai L'Sasu L'Chem. V'Sok Shemen HaMishra. V'Oysha She'osa Moshe V'Midbar T'chsev Al B'Sar Adam HaYisa. Achal Tavel, where's the Israel the devil? As a Rasai Milo Yichalu Shkache B'nai Yisrael Asher Yorimu. What does that mean? Sidin Litter Makos Midaber. Tevel is something that you will eventually be mafresh truma from. Welcome first to Sanhedrin Be'elahin Mazofin. Ma'asher Rishon Shalona Trumasoi Afu Tevel. It's also Tevel. U'Ma'asher Sheni Shaloi Nifta. V'Oich L'Chutz Yerushalayim U'Ksiv L'Such Alecha B'Sharecha. Hektish Shaloi Nifta. As a Rasa Einim Mefurish is Kolkar. It's not so Mefurish where we know that there's a law to eat hektish that wasn't Nifta. When near Be'ena the Mahacha also, it comes from here. The Tanya hated b'Meila, Rebbe over Misah, v'Chomor b'Asara. For Aminon, my time with the Rebbe, that it's Misah, also chet b'Truma, the Mitzvah b'Deshamayim. For Abanon miyat Rachmana umesu boy dafke Truma, v'lei b'Meila, but b'Meila there's no Misah. So we say Misah hu d'ma'ate. We really do learn it from Truma. We're just saying it doesn't have Misah like Truma. But and therefore be afin ashara the meila me'asara the truma. The law that applies to truma applies to meila as well. Most of the halachas of meila we learn out of truma. The teres kahanim, the gzeir shava, the gzeir shava. Okay, weiter. Be oichel nevela is the trevish shkatzim u'ramoshim. I'll tell you my reasons not for Masai, my Shishani, the Eknish Lanivdu. Kama Yoichel min Tevel, the Chai. How much Tevel do you have to eat to be Chai Malchus? Reb Shimon Makoshu, Amashu, Chamoim Kazayis. Amul and Reb Shimon. Reb Shimon said, Iyatim Oidem Li, Boichel Namala Koshu Shu Chai. If you eat a tiny little thing like an ant, you're Chai. It's not a Kazayis, but it's the period. So Amruloi. So they told him back. The Chacham told him back, what do you mean? Because a namala, a little insect, is a full bria. Amalan, Reb Shimon said, no. If you eat a full wheat kernel, that's also a beria, and therefore you'd be chai for it, even though it's not a kazayis. Zok to Gemara. Chai v'krisos katani, chai v'mitzvahs based on like katan. It's very obvious that Atana picked chai v'krisos for the list of items that get Malchus, and it's clearly that he intentionally omitted Chayiv Mises best. Zokter Mani Rabbi Kiva, it's going to go according to Kiva who holds Ein Loika Umeis. You don't get Mises Bezdin and Malchus. The Tanya we learned Echod Chayiv Krisos, Echod Chayiv Mises Bezdin. Sai Chayiv Krisos and Sai Chayiv Mises Bezdin. Yeshna Bechlal Malchus. They do get Malchus. Clearly, that's not the Shita of our Mishnah. The Rabbi Shmuel, the Rabbi Kiva Omer, Chai v'krisos yeshna b'chal malchus, as is listed in our Mishnah, but b'chal malchus arboim. Why? Because Shem also tshuva. If you do tshuva, let's say someone got malchus, and he has Chai v'krisos. If he did tshuva, bezdin shamayla moichel lahem. So therefore, the malchus would have covered for the chorus. But Chai v'mises bezdin, even if someone does tshuva, bezdin doesn't have the authority to forego the Mrs. Bezin. They still have to kill him. Bezin Einoi. Shemasu Tshuva, Bezin Shemala Meichel Lahem. Having Mrs. Bezin, Ein Bechal Malchus Abarim, Shemasu Tshuva, Ein Bezin Shamata, Meichel Lahem. We have a third sheet. The Yuta Gleimer, Chai Vechrisos Bechlal Hoyu, which Rashi learns means the Isser of a Choisoi is Bekaris. We know all arayis are Bekaris because all arayis are hukash to each other. So therefore, they're all together. Rashi says, "Chai v'krisos shel arayis bechlal ho yudichsiv Yichol asher yaser mikoy la toyevo yisraela v'nichushu nefashos. So they're all in one group. Oy bazoi. They're all in one group that they get chorus. Oy bazoi v'lama yotzes chorus b'achoisoi. By achoisoi, the Torah says specifically that if someone marries his sister, he gets chorus. Why would it not be included in all of the other rice? Ladoinoi b'chorus b'loy b'malchus. To tell us that when you get chorus, you don't get malchus. So Rabbi Yitzchak holds that even chayvei krisos don't get malchus. So Rabbi Shmuel holds even Mrs. Bezdin get malchus. Rabbi Kiva says only chayvei krisos get malchus, and Rabbi Yitzchak says even chayvei krisos don't get malchus. No, Vibal, the Torah spoke out chorus by Choisoi, that tells you that Choisoi and everyone else only gets chorus and not malchus. Let's see Rashi, Ladoine b'chorus, Lekach Shona b'chorus len loymar, Chain ben Einish el chorus levadoi, and it's going on everything. Okay, Gavalti. Zok to Gemara, my time with Rabbi Shmuel. What the svar of Rabbi Shmuel that chayvei Mrs. Bezin can get malchus? Dichsiv. There's in the pasuk. Im loy sishmor lasois is called divrei haTorah hazois. It says if you don't listen to all of the words of the Torah, uksiv, the next pasuk says what will happen to you? The hifla Hashem es makoischa. Hashem will be hifla es makoischa. What does it mean? Hashem will be hifla es makoischa. Haflazu einei demai. I don't know what the Torah is referring to when the Torah says any aver that you do, there'll be a hifla. But kishu oimer ve'pilu ha'shoifet v'keilefanav, which is referring to Malchus, ha'oimer haflazu Malchus. So you see that any violation that you do, no matter what, there'll also be a chiyuv Malchus for it. Uchsiv, it says in Mloi Sishmar Lasois Eskol. If you don't listen to all of Hashem's mitzvahs, you're liable to get Malchus. Right to Gemara, Ihachi Chayve Asenami. So why is it only Chayve Loises according to Rabbi Shmuel that we'll get Malchus? It says if you don't listen to anything Hashem said, anything that Hashem says would even mean a mitzvah to say. So why don't you get Malchus from mitzvah to say? So because it says in Mloi Sishmar Ksiv. It says in Mloi Sishmar, which means if you don't adhere to a law, so it's only referring to Aloisas. Rabban Amar Baloi. Rabban Amar Baloi taught us a very famous rule that we all know, that Aloshan Tishmor is always referencing a law. Domer Rabban Amar Baloi, Pamokim Shenemar Hishomer, Pen, Ve'al, those three expressions, Einoi El Loisas, it's referring to Aloisas. So Zaktimor, okay, we only know that Loisas says get Malchus. But what about a Lav Shem B'Maisa? Yochilav Shem B'Maisa Nami. Shouldn't that also fit under the heading of Imloi Sheshmor Lasas Cholelim? Even Lav Shem B'Maisa? And we know for Lav Shem B'Maisa, you do get Malchus. Or you don't get Malchus. So Yochilav Shem B'Maisa Nami. So tomorrow it says Lasas. It's only if you do something wrong. A Lav Shem B'Maisa, there's no Lasas, so you won't get Malchus for it. Lasas trip. For tomorrow, what about Lav Shem Nitek Lasay Nami? To get Malchus? It's also doing anything that Hashem doesn't want you to do. So tomorrow for that we have a new svar, Dumya the Lav Dechasim. The Torah says near the parish of Malchus, the Torah tells us L'Sachsim Shor B'Dishay. And we learn that the only type of various of Lav that you get Malchus for are Lavin that are similar to the Lav of L'Sachsim Shor B'Dishay. Meaning there's a Maisa involved, there's a Chasiba, it's not a Lav Nitik Lasei. So Zoktim Hash to Losas Lahachi. Now that you've discovered this comparison to Lav Chasima, so then I didn't need all your previous terutzim of lasos and this. Rather, kulanami domid the Lav Chasima. The reason why you don't get Malchus for a Lav Nitik Lasei and a Lav Shoyim B'Maisa is because it's not domid to Lav Chasima. Okay, so that takes care of the shita of Rabbi Shmuel. What about Rabbi Kiva? For Rabbi Kiva, my timer. Why does Rabbi Kiva hold you do not get Malchus if you're going to get a Chiv Misah? Because it says Kedei Rishasai, famous limud, we had it before. Right? The Gemara uses to explain the Mishnah that says that you don't get Hazama and pay. Because we say Mishum Risha Achas Ata Mechayvoi, Vi Ata Mechayvoi, Shum Shtei Rishayos. If you have such a pasuk, so how did Rabbi Shmuel explain? According to Rabbi Shmuel, Kedei Rishasai should say that you can't get a Chiv Misah and Malchus. Zok Rabbi Shmuel, no. Hanamili Misah Mammon. The Kedera Shas is just telling you that there's no Chiv Mammon together with the Chiv Misah. Or Malkus and Mammon. Of a Misah Malkus, that's considered one big punishment because Misah Arichtahi. If you do Misah, if you first give them a Malkus, then Bezdin kills him, you look at the Malkus like it was the beginning of the Misah. Ula Rabbi Akiva, who holds, you do have the Kedei Rishasai to say that you can't get Malkus and Misah. Ihachi Chayve Krisus Nami. If you're relying on the Kedei Rishasai, Mishum Misha Achas, so what about Chayve Krisus? Mishum Misha Achas. You should only get Kroros, not Malkus. My Zaktimora, Amrit, we said, Ishim Asu Tshuva. We said that if they do tshuva, so that's why you don't get both, because he maybe will do tshuva. But that's why you can give him malchus. You can give him malchus because it won't be a problem with Kedei Rishosai, because he won't get the chorus. Frankly, more about hashta miyaloyopti. Yeah, if he did tshuva, maybe I would hear that you could give him malchus. But until he does tshuva, there should be a Kedei Rishosai because he's lined up, he's on deck for chorus. How could you give him malchus? Amar Bavo, Zok Bavo. Beferish rip satira chayve krisus lamalkus. According to Rabbi Akiva, there's a mefurish riboy to tell us that there's a chiv malchus, and it could be that proves that the Kedei Rishosai, according to certain one shot, that proves that the Kedei Rishosai that Rabbi Akiva said is not referring to Karis and malchus. The Gamar la'ene mi la'enech. It says la'ene v'nichresu la'ene b'nei amam. So by Chayve Krisos, it says La'inei, and by Malchus it says V'nikle Achicha Le'einecha. So we have a limud, a shova from Einei Teinecha to tell you that you can have Malchus in a case where it's a V'nichashu La'inei. Whenever it's a V'nichashu La'inei, you can give the person who was over Malchus because it says Le'einecha. Maskif Law Rab Abba Barmam. If you're relying on La'ene and La'enecha, I have a problem. Because the Hachi Chayv Mises Bezdin Nami, Nigmer and Me'ene Me'lenecha. We know it says La'enecha by Malchus, and it doesn't say La'ene by Chayv Mises Bezdin, but it says Me'ene. Because by Mises Bezdin, it has a lotion of Me'ene, because it says in Me'ene necessarily.
It's never locked, and it's locked.
So Gemara, Donin la'ene mila'enecha. You learn la'ene, which is by Chayve Krisos, mi le'enecha, which is by Malchus. Vein donin me'ene, which is by Mrs. Bezdin, mi le'enecha. Pray Gemara, umay nafkamina. We know you're not that picky when you're making Kedei Shova, because Vatana we learned the very B'Shmuel. It says V'Shova Kayin. When he comes back after the first 7 days, after a neg is locked up, Uvaka is a different nusach, but it means the same thing, that the kohen comes back again and inspects it after the second set of 7 days that the mitzvah was locked up. And we learn Zui Shiva, Zui Bia. In other words, whatever applies to the first visit applies to the second visit, even though it's not really the same word, but it refers to the same idea. So why can't you learn up Me'enei from Le'enecha? And even if you don't want to do that, at least learn Me'enei from Le'enei. You can't learn Me'enei from Le'enecha, but we already know Le'enei, meaning by a Chayiv Karis is Malchus. So Me'enei, learn from Le'enei. They just like by a Chayiv Karis you get Malchus, so too by Chayiv Mishis Bezdin you get Malchus as well. The Gomer Le'enei, Le'enecha. Dr. Gemara, Kibla Minei Rab Shmuel Bar Rav Yitzchak. So there's two pshatim how Rashi learns. So the first pshat is Kibul Minei Rab Shmuel l'Teshuva Zu Me'Rab Abba Barmam. Rab Shmuel accepted this kasha that Rab Abba Barmam asked. That is, you should learn it out from Leinei. So we have a kasha now. How do you deal with knowing, according to Rabbi Akiva, that for Chayv and Misah's Bezdin you don't get Malchus and Misah? And he goes back to the same story. But with an explanation. What type of Risha are we talking about? If it's within Bezdin's control whether to give him each of these Einshim, Malchus, and Misah, then we say Kedei Rishosai, Bezin can only inflict one. But Koresh is not inflicted by Bezin. So therefore, the halach of Kedei Rishosai doesn't apply because Bezin could only carry out the sentence of Malchus, they don't carry out the sentence of Koresh, so there's no din of Kedei Rishosai. Period. Rava Amar, Rava says, Asher Beilik Tola. What if they warned him Lemisa? In other words, when he was about to do the Aveira, they didn't say if you do this Aveira, you're going to get Malchus. They said if you do this Aveira, you're going to get Misah. So there, Kula Amaloi Pligi, the Ein Loikumes. There, everybody agrees that Ein Loikumes. Even if Shmuel would agree that if they warned him that he'll get Mrs. Besn, and they didn't mention anything about Malchus, for sure he doesn't get Malchus. Key Pligi. Where is the machlokes? Where does Rabbi Shmuel hold you get Malchus in the case of a chiv and Mrs. Pessin? Is the Asher Bela Malchus, where they told him if you do this Aveira, you're going to get Malchus. Rabbi Shmuel Savar, Lav Shanit Nasaris Mrs. Pessin, Lekin Lav. Even though this Lav will also lead to Asaris Mrs. Pessin. Because you could be Chayiv Mrs. Pessin for it, you could still get Malchus for it. Rabbi Kiva Savar, Lav Shanit Nasaris Mrs. Pessin, Ein Lekin Lav, you don't get Malchus for it. Zok Gemara Rabbi Kiva Ihachi Chai V'Krisus Nami. It's lav shenitin lasaris karsu. If there's a lav on it that leads to karus, why is that any different than if it's a lav that leads to misa? And therefore, you shouldn't be able to get malchus and karus. Amar Rav Mordechai Rav Ashi Hachi Amar Avimai Me'agroin Yom Shmei Rava. This is how Avimai answered this in the name of Rava. The lav for an Isra of Chayv Krisos isn't for the Kares. In other words, we know there's a rule, Ein Einshin Elam Ken Masirin. That only applies to an Einish of Bezdin, but or such as Malchus, such as Misah Bezdin. But Kares, you don't need a Asharah. So therefore, it's not a lav shenit in Lasaris Kares, because you don't need a Asharah for Kares at all. So the Asara will be only for the Malchus. And I'll bring you a raya. Because Shari Pesach Umila, if you don't bring a carbon Pesach, you chayiv Kares. If you don't get a bris, you chayiv Kares. Onash, you get an oinish there, the chayiv Kares, Aval B'Shloi Yizer. So you see that Kares doesn't need a Asara. Freit the Gemara, okay, but there's another thing that a chayiv Krisus brings when it's a lav. And that is a carbon, right? If someone's over Chayv Krisus Shaygeg, he brings the carbon. So Vidoma Asar the carbon. Maybe the reason that there's a lav there is because on a lav you wouldn't be able to bring a carbon. The Pesach Mila, the less Bu Asara, Lemaisi carbon. If you don't bring a carbon Pesach B'Shaygeg, or if you don't get a Bris Mila, there's no carbon. If you hate Chaylev B'Shaygeg, you bring a carbon. So therefore, maybe you cannot say that the ashara is for the carbon, or maybe the ashara is for the. Maybe the ashara is for the carbon, and Vaita you don't have ashara for Malchus, and that would explain why. So you want to say what explains why Pesach and Mila has carbon because there's no ashara? No, maybe the reason why there's no ashara by Pesach and Mila because there's no carbon, but the ashara by a regular chayv krisus is for the carbon. So Vaita, how do you know that you can give Malchus for chayv krisus? You know why you bring a chatas only for lavin and not for Pesach and Mila? It's not with Ashara. It's because they're all hikdish lavoid gecham. Ma avoid gecham shaval tasa. Just like by the ver of avoid zara that you bring a carbon b'shoygeg because it's something that the Torah is telling you don't do something. Avkol shaval tasa. So too, any time you bring a chatas, it's only if you were told not to do something and you went and did it. But anytime that you're told to do something and you don't do it, there is no chiv chatas lafukahani de kumase. So therefore, it has nothing to do with the asara as to whether or not you bring a carbon. Asara has nothing to do with the carbon. Therefore, the asara could be for the malchus because for chorus, which is b'dei shemaim, you don't need an asara. Ravina says, La'olam hidamrinon meikara. Let's go back to the original svara, which is time with Rabbi Kiva is because of Kedei Rishosai. You had a kasha, chayve krisos. There's also a problem there's two Rishoyos. How could you give somebody Malchus if he's getting chorus? That's not a kasha. You know why? Because Kidamin Mekara, Shemasu Tshuva, Bezin Shalmai Lemoichlan. So my Amr, what was your taina before? Why that's not a good taina? Haloi over tshuva. Right now he didn't do tshuva. So how can you give him Malchus now? But like Psika Milsa, look cars. But Lamaisa, we're not sure he's going to get cars. He might do tshuva. If someone does a issue that involves a chi of Misah, Bezdin, you know for sure he's getting Misah Bezdin. So you can't give him chorus. So you can't give him Malchus. But if someone was over Chayv Krisos, yes, right now he's Chayv chorus. But you don't know if he's going to do tshuva. It's possible that he will do tshuva, and therefore he won't have chorus, and therefore you should give Malchus. Okay, we'll stop here, Bez Hashem, and we will be Mamshech tomorrow. Have a wonderfully safe trip. It was Gishmak. Thank you for giving us a little labor kind over here for Yom Tov. And we're looking to have a very safe trip. We're looking forward to seeing you Mitzvah on Shavuos.